Okay, guys, last week we left off with numbers, and I think the last one that we did was ignoring written numbers. So this week we're going to do digits and written out. Okay?
So far we've been asking questions about how you write numbers, but now we'll ask questions about how you want your numbers transcribed. What kind of numbers do you want translated as digits, and what kind of numbers should be written out? To be more specific, what do you want written out in general, and what do you want written out at the start of a sentence? As you can see, there are a number of choices. We'll illustrate them now. Here's a rather typical number conversion setup. Eclipse is not being asked to ignore written numbers, and quantities from 1 to 10 will be written out. So 11 and above would be in digits, but we'll explore our options. Let's tell the system not to write out anything. Let's see how that would work. I'll write it's 1, 11, 101, and 1001. And here you see that because I had told the system not to write out any values, it didn't matter that I was using a word stroke that was defined as a written out number. Each of these numbers was not written out. It was in pure digits. Now let me go to the opposite extreme and tell the system to write out all values, no matter how small or how large. It's 1, 11, 101, and 1001. In fact, this time I deliberately used the number bar, but you see that Eclipse put all of these numbers entirely in words, and that's because I said, write out all values. Of course, this is not a setting that you'll probably use, but it does illustrate the extremes. It's quite common to put one...
Y'all see the difference there, guys? On what it does? When you change that setting of no values, it's always going to put the numbers written out. When you change it to all values, it's always going to write them out. So that's the difference in that setting. Okay?
1 and 1001. In fact, this time I deliberately used the number bar, but you see that Eclipse put all of these numbers entirely in words.
And you see the difference there on the no values? He even wrote it out, and it still comes out in numbers. And here he used a number bar with the all values, and it still came out in letters, okay, written out. So be careful, what you want to do with that, because this is what it's going to do regardless of what you do it. Even if you do it this way on the no values, it's still going to come out in the numbers with the no values, regardless of whether you write it or you put the number, okay? And the opposite is just correct. The opposite is just the same of all values. It's always going to write it out.
Words, and that's because I said, write out all values. Of course, this is not a setting that you'll probably use, but it does illustrate the extremes. It's quite common to put 1 through 10 in words, but then shift to digits for 11 and above. But if you have other preferences, there are several choices to support them. Let's try this one. 1 through 10 in words, and then even tens in words, but other numbers in digits. It's 1, 10, 11, 20, 21, and 30. And again, I used the number bar in this example, and you see it didn't affect, in and of itself, what was going to be written out or in digits. So I hope it's clear that the question, what should be written out, doesn't ask how you are writing your numbers, but it's asking how do you want them transcribed, in digits or in words. Our examples so far have used quantity numbers, but there are separate settings for currency numbers and ordinal numbers. So if you believe that currency numbers should never be written out, you can set write out to no values. Here's an example. It's $5. But if you believe currency amounts from 1 to 10 should be written out and then begin using digits as of 11, then you could adjust your number transcription rules. It's $5. Likewise, you decide whether ordinal numbers will be written out from 1 to 10 or some other threshold, or never written out, or always written out. I'll go ahead and select write out ordinals from 1 through 10. It's the second and 22nd. By the way, the ND was placed in superscript because I chose to use the option Extra Ordinal Formatting, which is available on newer versions of Eclipse. This will affect my hard copy, but it will not appear any different on the ASCII file. The kinds of numbers you want written out at the start of a sentence may be very different from the kinds of numbers you want written out in general. So you have these same choices that can be set at the start of a sentence. So at the start of a sentence, I want quantities from 1 to 100 written out, and currency amounts from 1 to 100 written out, and ordinals from 1st through 100th written out, but 101st and above will be in digits with an ordinal ending. And each of these preferences is quite different from what I want written out in general. This is just for the start of a sentence. Clarify? It just lets you set the threshold for replacing a long series of commas and zeros with easy-to-read words that indicate an order of magnitude. So if you find 1 million easier to read than this number, then your threshold would be million. The default setting here, of course, is million. And if you raised the threshold to billion, then 5 million would translate with a lot of zeros and commas, but 5 billion would be much easier to read.
It's kind of stuff that we touched on last week. It was just kind of more in depth. So any questions on that? It's pretty self-explanatory, but I mean, we kind of touched on it a little bit. He just kind of went a little more in depth about it. Any questions on it?
You may have noticed a number of options in the time portion of the numbers setup. So let's see what these are for. Question is, if a speaker indicates only hours without minutes, which format do you want to use? Let's try the first format. Be there at 10 a.m. Now, for many people, this would be perfectly transcribed. Others might think that 10:00 is the way that you write 10 o'clock. So they might say that when a speaker indicates hours without minutes, it should be transcribed something like this. Be there at 10 a.m. Here's the third format. Be there at 10 a.m. And here's our fourth format. Be there at 10 a.m. Again, I think that these first two formats are by far the most common. But these other formats exist to keep from limiting your choices.
Do you understand what it's saying there? We kind of touched on it last week or whatever, but I mean, I think that these two, I mean, like he said, are more commonly used. This one is the way that I do it. To me, it looks better than just 10 a.m. But like he said, some people read it as 10 o'clock a.m. I was just taught that this is the way that you do it. So, you know, it may change, you know, whoever you go to work for, they may want it, you know, this way. Who knows? They may want it this way. They didn't say 10 o'clock a.m. to me. So I would never put that. But some people believe that that's what this means. It's 10 o'clock a.m. Whatever. So, I mean, there's just different ways of setting it up. And the software does it for you. So however you want to do it, it'll set it up for you.
There are three words that automatically imply a time conversion: AM, PM, and o'clock. When you know that time is being discussed, but none of these words has been said, then you can use a time conversion trigger. And this would be part of a dictionary entry. Remember, we said that good automatic number conversion is a combination of fine-tuning your user settings and fine-tuning your dictionary. If you'd like to reduce steno strokes, you can create dictionary entries that combine a number and a time conversion trigger. For example, I use the number bar 1 with the letter U to indicate that I'm trying to write 1 as part of a time number. So I have the numbers 1 through 12 defined in this fashion, plus also 15, 30, 45, and a few other common time numbers. This makes it easy to write numbers like this. At 10:30, I'll be there. Or if you have a colon stroke that you only use when you're writing times, you could define it as the time conversion trigger. And this stroke could be written at the start, somewhere in the middle, or at the very end of the number that you want converted to a time number. So at 10 colon stroke 48, and at 10:49 colon stroke they departed. The examples
You see what they were doing there? It doesn't really matter kind of where you put it, as long as you have it defined as time. Okay? But you have to be careful because you don't want to use the same stroke that you use for colon as you do for time. Okay? Because you're going to be used at different times. So you kind of want to be careful, that maybe you use one, maybe it's COL as a colon, and maybe just CL, which is KRL, with the asterisk as your time, and it's going to be defined completely differently. Okay?
given have used the defaults for the United States. But if you're working elsewhere, you can change the time symbol in the vocabulary section of your numbers settings. So for instance, if your time symbol is a period instead of a colon, then you could go to the vocabulary setup portion of the numbers section of user settings and just change the time symbol from a colon to a period. Or if the...
Y'all see what it's saying there? I don't think you'll ever use it, but I mean, if you do, you go abroad and they use it differently somewhere else, then that's where you change it.
Do you do anything like that?
No, I don't do anything other than the regular time. So I've never had to do it, and I've even taken depositions in Mexico. Not that it's different there, but I mean, I've never gone any further than there to take a deposition. So I mean, I don't know where it would be different. I mean, I'm just showing my ignorance, but I mean, I don't know where the time is different, where they use like a period or they use the H for hour, and stuff like that. But if you do, then this is where you go to change it. Okay?
H were placed as an indicator of the hour, you could use that as your time symbol.
Okay. Any questions about that? Pretty straightforward.
A key concept behind Eclipse Intelligent Translation is that ordinary words in your dictionary, like dollars or pounds or PM, work like magic to imply specific number conversions. So if you've converted your dictionary from another CAT system, the word pounds will be understood to imply a specific number conversion without you having to add any extra formatting or special symbols to your regular dictionary entry.
Do you understand what it's telling you there? All you have to do is when you define this and you want it as pounds, you just write it out. So when it has a number, it knows what to do. It should know what to do with the number. That's what it's saying. You don't have to put LBS or any of that stuff. It should know what to do with the number. Okay?
This is possible because the metadictionary that is automatically created when you install Total Eclipse contains several hundred words that are identified as money words, or singular and plural, units of measurement. And though advanced users can edit all of this, you do not have to open the metadictionary before taking advantage of the power that it gives to Eclipse Intelligent Translation. So what does Eclipse do if there are no trigger words to imply a specific number conversion? Then it looks at how many digits there are in the number in order to judge what is the appropriate number conversion. And this can be set in your user settings. In the United States, the default is that 1, 2, and 3-digit numbers will follow your rules for quantity conversions, while 7 and 10-digit numbers will be interpreted as phone numbers, and 9-digit numbers will be interpreted as social security numbers. However,
I think I told you this last week also, guys. Automagic's also, I mean, they're going to set it up for you. So if it's 9 numbers, it's going to know, that it's probably a social security number. It's going to set it up the way that you did it, as in maybe, I don't know, several dates, or it'll set it up in social security, maybe several different times. So it'll kind of give you different options. It'll even set it up as, if it's 9, then it's, what is that, millions? Yeah, millions. So, I mean, it'll set it up in the number that it needs to, and it'll give you different options anyway. But if not, then you always know and come in here and tell it that when it's 9 numbers, that's usually what you want it as. So this is where you do it. You just go into your user settings and numbers, kind of changes to whatever you need to.
You can change any of these defaults. For example, you might want to change the default for 9-digit numbers so that it will use a generic number conversion. That's pure digits without any commas or other symbols. So if you're not working in the United States, it's very important to know that you can change any of these defaults to be useful to you. One last note on these default conversions that are based on the number of digits. Eclipse is not looking at how many strokes it took you to write the number. For instance, this 10-digit number was written in 8 strokes. Also, it doesn't matter whether you're using the number bar or word strokes that are defined in your dictionary as written out numbers, unless you have a check in the box next to ignore written numbers. This number converts, and because it's 10 digits and there are no trigger words specifying some other conversion, it defaults, in the United States, to the format for telephone numbers.
Any questions there? Pretty self-explanatory too.
Total Eclipse does not need a large number of dictionary entries to serve as building blocks for good number
We've already gone through. We've already done that. Where you just write it out. You just write out the word. You don't have to do any of the stuff or measurements, numbers, any of that stuff. Money. You just write out dollars, cents, ordinals is first, second, whatever. So you don't have to worry about, doing any of that. It all kind of converts it for you.
Now let's see how to enter your main dictionary and filter out old counterproductive number entries.
We went through that also, guys, about going through and finding trigger words. Y'all remember that?
Trigger words?
Like numbers and stuff like that, and it'll give you all of the numbers. We'll watch this one real quick.
With a minimum of effort. Open your main dictionary. The default speed key for this is F9. Whether you're using an older or newer version of Eclipse, you'll notice that the file name defaults to your main dictionary. Perhaps it's your first name. Just take note of the name here. You'll need to know that later. Go ahead and open the dictionary. As of version 4 of Total Eclipse, steno and text is just a small part of the information that your dictionary makes available. We'll show the dictionary filtering process on both this version and older versions. But first we want to go to the start of the dictionary. Simply press Control Page Up. Then you can use the Find command. The default speed key on all versions is F5. On older versions, you would see this dialog, and you'd place a check in the box next to Numbers and Mark All. Then ask Eclipse to find any entry that contain numbers and mark them all.
You understand what it's saying there? So any entry that has numbers or has to do with numbers, it'll find it for you and it'll list them. You understand that?
You would then see a small X next to each entry that contains a digit. As of version 4 of Total Eclipse, it's even easier to find number entries. When the dialog opens to help you find dictionary entries, take a look at the list of text shortcuts. Scroll down the list and you'll find several that help you find different kinds of number entries. I'll just ask Eclipse to help me find all numbers. After a little while, the dictionary display is filtered to show me just the entries that contain numbers. As of version 4, we'll now want to press Shift plus Control Page Down to mark all the number entries that are in the filtered display. And the next steps are the same on both older and newer versions. We want to separate these entries. In other words, move them to a new dictionary that will contain just numbers. Eclipse will ask for the name of the new dictionary, and I'll simply call it Numbers. You may receive a dialog that asks if you want to delete these entries. You can simply answer yes. They're not being destroyed, they're simply being moved to a separate dictionary. We've now transferred the numbers entries into a separate numbers dictionary. Now we could put back into your main dictionary some entries that you'll almost certainly want to keep. This would include capitalized entries and one-stroke entries. Of course, rather than simply dumping...
Do you see what it's telling you guys there? You can take out all your trash by doing that and putting it into a separate file. And then if you want to put it back, all you do is this Shift Control X and it puts it back into your main dictionary. Okay? So it's actually a pretty neat little thing. So it takes out all of your trash, or you can go through there and convert every one that you want. Be prepared, because if you have somebody else's dictionary, there's going to be a lot of entries in there. So, it just all depends on which ones you want to keep and which ones you don't.
These entries back into your dictionary, you could find them first and review them, perhaps deleting some that you know you don't want to keep. Here are some examples of entries that contain capitalized text. I-45, a name that also includes digits, completely capitalized text, such as a speaker identifier. These are not building blocks for larger numbers. In both the older and newer versions of Eclipse, there are ways to find these entries. As of version 4, look in the text shortcuts and select capitalized. You can then remove entries that you don't want to keep, select the rest, and use the separate process once again to move the keepers back into your main dictionary. This is where you need to know the name of your main dictionary. If you're asked if it's okay to delete these entries, don't worry. They're simply being deleted from the numbers dictionary but moved over to the main dictionary. Numbers that you write with just one stenostroke are also something you'll probably want to keep, because these are likely building blocks. If you write a number with 2 stenostrokes, perhaps it can be built up from one-strokers, but if it's only written with 1 stenostroke, it can't be broken down into anything less. Both the older and newer versions of Eclipse have ways of finding one-stroke entries. In version 4, go to the list of steno shortcuts and select one-stroke so that your display is filtered. After you've reviewed the one-strokers and deleted any that you don't need, you can use the separate process to move the keepers back to your main dictionary.
You understand what it's telling you there?
Following this process should give us a running start on keeping just the essential entries that we want to have for good number translation.
Alright. I think pretty much all the other stuff we've covered. I don't know if we've covered hyphens and slashes, fractions.
Let's see how you'll want to define your dictionary entries for hyphens and slashes to get the best number conversion with Eclipse. Look at this example.
Normally, I would want the numbers that appear on either side of a hyphen to be digits, not written out. But here Eclipse is simply following my rules for quantities. So this number between 1 and 100 was written out at the start of a sentence. And this number, which is between 1 and 10, was written out thereafter. To force digits on either side of a hyphen, simply define your entry for the hyphen like this. A generic number conversion trigger on either side of the hyphen. Notice the #G is within its own braces, and the hyphen is within its own braces. The slash would be defined in a similar way. A #G within braces, followed by the slash within braces, and then another #G within braces. Let's see that in action. 12/1. This time the numbers appeared as digits rather than written out, and that's because the slash forced the numbers on either side of it to be generic number, that is, digit rather than written.
If I say 5/16,
Do you understand what it was saying there?
So it wants us to have that G around the slash?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on.
That'll only apply to numbers, right?
Yeah.
So do we need to have a separate slash that's not for numbers? Or will it know?
No, because you'll just define it as that, a slash.
So it's squiggly, G squiggly. And then it was also for what? The hyphen.
Yeah. Hyphen or a slash.
And that works for numbers and words. Right.
Yeah. But see how they define slash? It's not slash. It's not with an A. So this is how it knows that it needs to be converted to this. Because if you have slash, then it's going to put 12 SLASH 1.
Yeah. Because.
Or you can do slash with the asterisk to define it differently. So it all depends on how you want to do it, but you know, if you hear slash and you're going to hit slash and you know that it's a slash and not the word slash, then you have to know how to hit it